when I knew that it was going to be this world of influencer marketing was going to be really big, I have this very clear memory of we had a restaurant that was opening and we invited media to come and experience it and write about it. And then about a few weeks later, we invited influencers to come in. And I remember my client either calling or emailing and saying the amount of reservations that we just got from that influencer posting about our restaurant, we've never seen that before. And I was just sitting there, I was like, wow, this is crazy, when at a time that a restaurant would be so thrilled about a media placement in the Boston Globe, which they still are, or Boston Magazine, or some of these other outlets, to then have a influencer, I think it was Boston Foodies, who was posting about your restaurant and was driving that many reservations. I was shocked, and I got really excited about it because it was really nice to see kind of like the ROI that we were providing for our clients, almost like in real time. It was like proving that what we were doing was right, and it was, helping them as a business. They would get excited about it. So over time, I became ultra obsessed with influencers, bloggers. I mean, early on, people kind of rolled their eyes at influencers and bloggers, but I mean, look at the industry now. I mean, I still think there's a lot of bad eggs in the industry, but back then, it was so new. We really had to educate our clients a lot and educate the people that I was working with. And so I really wanted to go all in on influencer marketing. And I didn't feel like where I was in my career was prioritizing it. And so one day, I was just sitting there thinking like, man, I think that I need to take this risk. I need to take this next step. I know how to do PR. This was back during when social media was usually done by your publicist as well. So I was doing social media as well. And then I really wanted to dive into influencer marketing. And so that's how Wave started, was basically taking that model of being full service with PR, social, influencer marketing, and content creation, and weaving them all together. And I found that to be really successful, and our clients were really happy with it. And that kind of has now guided how Wave has grown over the past few years, is like sticking to those 4 pillars.
Definitely. I'm trying to think. So Wave was started in 2016, correct?
Yes. Yep.
But when you first got the idea of influencer marketing and, you really stood behind it, I mean, was there Instagram stories? Was there analytics? And like, I guess to a lot of these companies' credits, there wasn't as much of the hard data and metrics to support. It was sort of a trust and believe type of thing. It's come so far now, but yeah, I kind of forgot that like Instagram didn't come out with Instagram stories right away. There weren't analytics to show how many people are saving or, clicking the link in your bio and doing this and doing that. I don't even know if there was a link in bio.
No, there wasn't.
It's come a long way, but because of people like you who understood the power in it without having to necessarily see the hard numbers, the reservations speaks for itself.
Well, what it was is, you're right. There was no analytics. There's no Instagram stories. It was Facebook, Instagram, or a blog or a newsletter. So those were the 4 things. I would say what we would focus on is actually what you're not really supposed to focus on now. It was vanity numbers. So how many followers they had and how many likes they were getting on their posts and how many comments. And we could create, or we would do the math on the engagement rates, and at least with blogs, you could see how many visitors you were getting to your blog. And Facebook, the vanity number was how many people liked the Facebook page. And then again, we would look at likes and comments. So everything was public knowledge that you could see as a user on the platform. Everything changed drastically when Instagram finally rolled out analytics. And then you were able to see like impressions, reach, like audience breakdown. That was huge. But yeah, from the very beginning, early stages, we had to make decisions on whether to work with influencers based on those vanity numbers. And it actually was kind of difficult because you had people buying followers, you had people buying likes. You had to really do some research into trying to figure out who was authentic and who wasn't. If someone posted on Instagram and within 5 minutes it got 300 likes and let's say they had 1,000 followers, you were a little skeptical. And I would go and click and see who the accounts were that liked it.
User 129678810.
So that was a red flag. But those were things that you had to do to ensure that you were working with influencers that had authentic following and authentic engagement.
Totally. A lot of trial and error at first.
Absolutely. Over time, there are definitely tools that help marketers to be able to weed out who are those bad eggs. But it took some time to get there. So we would have to do things very manually.
Definitely. And, the advantage for these companies is so much of influencer marketing, not quite anymore, but in that time period was earned or organic too. Yes. So the risk and the cost was very, very low. How many times do you have a grumpy customer where you end up having to comp their steak dinner just so they shut up and don't leave a bad Yelp review or don't make a scene? Yep. Things like that happen all the time. So how much food are you giving away for free already? You have an influencer come in, you comp her meal, she posts about it, has a lovely time, and that actually brings in new business for you. Yep. Where that, those comps don't always really go a long way. Your reservation's a little bit late before seating you, so we'll buy you a round of drinks. We do all those things all the time in hospitality. Yep. And so think of ways that you do what you're already doing, but then use it to your advantage.
Absolutely. I felt, and what you're saying is true, early days, it wasn't as risky because you're right. Everything was earned. It was really rare that we would be paying influencers to post. I feel like once brands started to pay influencers, that's when those platforms that tracked analytics became very, very important. Because you're right, early on, you could be a beverage brand and you could send your product to an influencer and they would post and trade for the product. And if it didn't really go anywhere, you as a brand are like, okay, that cost us a few bucks,
right. No love lost.
Exactly. But once brands are starting to pay influencers $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, you better believe that they're expecting some results. And so that's where everything just became way more high stakes. And you couldn't be as risky with who you were working with. You really had to do your due diligence and figure out who is the right partner if my client is willing to spend this money.
Right. Now you have 5 paid contracts with what messaging and copy or keywords you need to use, what exactly the picture should look like, where the product should be placed. If there is a physical product, there's down to every last detail, and rightfully so. Rightfully so.
It's even more than that now. It's, thinking about exclusivity, that you can't work with a competing brand of ours for, let's say, 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
Who owns the content? Is it the influencer or is it the brand? How will the brand be able to use the content? Can they use it and repost it on their Instagram in an organic fashion? Or are they allowed to use that content now and do an entire paid ad campaign around it? What happens if someone wants to terminate? Indemnification.
My blood is boiling.
It goes on and on.
Just thinking about how many poor influencers have signed contracts where they're giving rights for perpetuity.
Yep.
Oh my God, that breaks my heart. But you did that wasn't talked about. They didn't know.
Yes.
There was no conversation about that in the beginning, but I'm sure you advise all of your influencers now not to sign any contracts that say they can have the rights for perpetuity, because that is the craziest thing.
I know.
Craziest.
So I didn't mention this before. We do influencer marketing at Wave, but we also manage influencers as well. And so we see a lot of contracts that come in. And I very much appreciate it when a brand sends a contract. And you're right. It says, we as the brand will license your image, your name, your likeness for 3 months. But then you'll see some brands that try to squeeze in we will own the content in perpetuity. You are transferring all rights to your content, your image to us. And every time we have to ask for red line requests and to change it, because it's almost like they're trying to like pull a fast one. And it's just unfortunate because then we have to go back and it takes longer to then, finish up the deal, because we have to go back and forth and change the language or negotiate the fees. So
it's surprising to me that they're even still trying. Because
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I think at this point, there's very few people who would accept those terms.
I hope, but honestly, that's where I think some influencers get preyed on when they're so new to the industry. They're so eager to do partnerships. It could be a brand that they're so excited to work with, and they'll just get the contract, skim through it, and just sign it. And honestly, because they are thrilled to be working with this brand, not realizing that there is potential, not always, but there is a potential that they'll get taken advantage of. And I will say this, influencers do the same for brands. You have influencers who've been in this space for a really long time, and you'll have brands who are just dipping their toes in influencer marketing, and they don't understand how much they should be paying. They don't understand just kind of like how a partnership works and what they can ask for and the deliverables and what's fair. And so I feel for both sides.
That's very true.
Yes.
Very, very true. Because there are equations that are used to calculate how much your content is worth and how much you should be paid. Although the numbers can be steep, they're not arbitrary.
Yep.
And I think that companies that are just getting into this, you hear these big numbers. Someone could say, $6,000 for a post, and they might just accept it because that seems to be right. But really that influencer, their stats don't equal a $6,000 post.
Exactly. And so I think both sides have arguments to say that, or not arguments, kind of moving backwards. I think both sides have things that they should educate themselves on so that they know when they go into a relationship with a brand or an influencer that everyone feels like they're getting a fair deal.